Do you think that AI as a technology has the potential for to push countries like India, developing economies like India?
The whole industrial pollution playbook that happened over the last decades, but let's make India a green AI exporter.
Hello and welcome to Technocracy. I'm Heena Goswami, editorial consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. As the race for AI supremacy intensifies globally and debate rages over the potentials and perils of the technology, one must remember over 90% of AI patents and investment are concentrated in a handful of powerful developed economies. So one is left to wonder, can developing economies, still grappling with their so-called third world problems, find their voice in this rapidly unfolding AI narrative? Or will they be cast only as consumers and battlegrounds in this geopolitical game? It is no secret that nations that dominate AI infrastructure also hold the reins of data flow, economic leverage, and narrative control. Algorithms shape policy, perception, and profit. The fear, of course, is digital neocolonialism, a modern form of dependency where the core technologies, data centers, and AI platforms remain foreign-owned and minimally accountable to local needs. These dependencies aren't just about code or compute. They are about control. Control over people's data, their choices, and increasingly their future. However, developing countries are not just vulnerable. They're also uniquely positioned to innovate with purpose. AI can and already has shown potential to solve many real-world problems in the global south. In agriculture, AI models are being used for climate-resilient farming and early pest detection, helping small-scale farmers remain ahead of unpredictable weather. In healthcare, AI-driven diagnostics and mobile telemedicine are closing the gap in remote and underserved regions. And in education, tools like personalized learning platforms and multilingual content system are helping break through language barriers that traditional education systems have long failed to address. What also needs to be accounted for is the demographic strength many of these countries possess. Large digitally native population with rising levels of education and entrepreneurship are laying the groundwork for AI ecosystems that are young, bold, and increasingly homegrown. In regions like Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, startup ecosystems focused on AI for social good are gaining momentum. However, innovation cannot scale without infrastructure. And that is why investment in affordable internet, domestic data center, and sustainable energy access must go hand in hand with AI ambition. Initiatives like UNESCO's AI for Development program have emphasized the importance of these foundational systems not as charity but as a shared global responsibility. However, even with this potential, challenges remain. Most AI systems used in developing countries are still built elsewhere. This means that the data they are trained on don't always reflect local context, languages, or priorities. That not only limits their effectiveness, but introduces significant bias, a concern raised repeatedly in UNESCO and UNHCR's recent reports on AI and inclusion. When a voice command system does not understand regional dialects, or when a lone algorithm overlooks local credit behavior, it isn't just a technical glitch. It's a systematic exclusion. The lack of policy frameworks that protect data sovereignty and citizens' rights further deepen this divide. Problem persists relating to not just development and deployment of AI technology, but also its governance. Developing countries had limited say in global AI governance. Whether it's OECD AI Principles Forum or the ongoing UN discussions on AI ethics and regulation, participation from global south has been minimal. Many countries still do not have national AI strategies, and even fewer have dedicated AI funding. And this is not for lack of will, but often due to lack of coordination, awareness, or institutional capacity. As a result, global AI standard risk being shaped without meaningful input from the very countries that will be most affected by them. But this is not a story of helplessness. The emerging resistance is real and growing. Coalitions across the global south, including BRICS nations, are calling for more autonomous, sovereign approaches to AI development. There's an active push to rethink AI value chain from infrastructure to training data and to advocate for models that align with national development goals and not just corporate interest. There's also renewed attention to the idea of digital non-alignment, a kind of strategic neutrality where countries invest in regional partnership and open source alternatives rather than aligning blindly with one geopolitical bloc or the other. Initiatives like India's Bhashali platform and African Union's digital strategy are building linguistic and contextual AI models that speak their own realities rather than mimic somebody else's. AI does not need to be a story of dependence or exclusion. For developing countries, it's also a window of opportunity to leapfrog, to innovate, and to lead. But this future will not be handed over. It must be claimed through policy, through partnership, and through people. Because in the end, technology is only as fair, as inclusive, and as transformative as the structures we build around it. To understand how developing economies such as India can make the best of the ongoing technological shift, today we are joined by Mr. Saurabh Mishra. Mr. Mishra is the co-founder and CEO of Taiyo.Ai, where he leads the evolution of global construction, infrastructure, and government spending industry by introducing the largest data and first AI platform designed to streamline efficiency and improve outcomes in the world's largest industry. He has also served as the director of Stanford AI Index, Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, HAI, and previously he also taught as a professor at UC Berkeley and University of San Francisco. So do you think that AI as a technology has the potential for to push countries like India, developing economies like India, leapfrog into a more advanced and better future on par with or even better than what the developed countries have at this moment? Like, can AI technology act as a leveling tool for economies around the world?
The short answer is yes, but I would not use, I mean, this old word that we've always used, leapfrogging and things of that nature. But I think, stepping back, every country is unique. Of course, India has an extensive history, but also a very unique pattern of specialization. I mean, if you looked at historically, right, the growth model that was being propagated was the China's Industrial Revolution and manufacturing-led growth. And India, over 25 years ago, I think already showed to the rest of the world that there is an alternative path to grow and to, bring about economic development. Where what happened over 2 decades ago was you see services, right, which have been long-standing thought to be non-tradable, not very productive, menial tasks. Even Adam Smith, two latest scholars think of services being not terribly productive. That view is, I think, hopefully changing. But India showed to the world with of course, these back office services and IT, BPO processing and others. India was able to, really show a new path of development to all other countries and created its own trajectory. So every country, right, keeping that service story in mind, but every country has its own set of sectoral diversity, right? India has very good at IT services, increasingly AI, but also I think other industries, right, from from Bollywood and creative industries, textiles, agriculture, pharmaceutical. So India is both a manufacturing and a modern service economy. And that I think provides multiple entry points for AI for India. And I think the main point, if I may, around here is AI is not for the sake of AI only. AI should relate to the core expertise that exist in the economy and the capabilities that a country has. So if India is very good at refined petroleum and gems and machinery, I think the first real question is how does AI help India be more competitive in existing manufacturing, agriculture, and services it's already doing? I think that's the first question, right? And the second is using AI and knowing that it helps, petroleum production to steel and tourism, what pathways does it create for countries like India in the next 5 to 10 years to further diversify its economy into new higher value added things? So I think the story is more about diversification, competitiveness, and India's leapfrogging isn't, I think, ditto copying the Silicon Valley right model, but using AI in the context of Indian economy, Indian culture, from what's happening in financial sector in Mumbai to politics to agriculture in the east of India. So how does it relate to the core competencies India has to help further make the economy more vibrant and bring about inclusive growth and development?
In the earlier conversations that we have had on the show, that one point was, brought to the notice was that AI technology is not singular, but it builds on the existing compute infrastructure of that nations already have. Is that a view that you agree with? And do you think it's necessary to have that kind of compute infrastructure in place? And for India to, let us use that term for my convenience, if for India to leapfrog into a better and advanced future, what do you think some of the basics that we need to begin with? Would it be a large language model? Would it be basics such as ensuring 24/7 electricity? What would exactly be it?
I think there's been well-grounded studies that a lot of manufacturing productivity in India is faltering behind because lack of electricity, for example. And it's an input to build data centers, and hence, if you have large compute capacity, um, it provides developers and resources, to the wider community to build. So one aspect is it's not one or the other. And let me explain what I think about it because one AI is not one thing, basically, right? It's not just compute, it's not just models. We had a paper we had released a couple of months ago on reliability, resilience, and human factors of building more trustworthy AI systems. So, there is data, yeah, that's an important component of building AI systems. There are models, and there's a lot of focus on models, and there's compute, which is something you're mentioning. There's software and code as well. There are human factors, right, of developers, deployers, end users interacting with these systems. So, in one regard, AI is not one thing because it's all these components that make up a full AI system. And while I think the US, for example, and other countries have this national AI compute programs and policy initiatives where how do you subsidize for research centers, universities to provide them access? So I think that's very important, not denying that. But the thing is, there's a lot of other things happening when you look at the AI system, and we need to pay equal attention to those aspects. Um, the second thing on large language models, again, AI is not one thing. We have recently done a analysis and we looked at the subdomains and tasks of AI. It's everything from voice recognition to semantic segmentation, object detection, uh, in computer vision, language, graph reasoning, robotics. So there are 20,000, at least 20,000 or more subcategories of AI. And to treat it as monolithic as just language models, I think would also be a mistake, especially in the context of the diversity of the Indian economy. And coming back to your original point on electricity, right? I mean, if you looked at the eastern part of India, right, where I'm from, in Bihar and Jharkhand and other states in the area, um, I think it's pretty well known that while there's been tremendous growth in development across India, I would note that things are potentially also diverging if you looked at sort of the centers of gravity in the Indian economy and the eastern part of India by the border. Um, and that's a pretty stark reminder and a big development challenge, perhaps a poster child of development challenges, I think more stark than even sub-Saharan Africa. So you need basic electricity, right? And how do you also spur, knowing this regional context of one, that there are AI models are not just compute, that's important, but there's other data models, software, human aspects, and there's 20 different thousand different types of AI. So it's important to keep the GPUs and the cloud computing factors, but how do we apply it in the regional disparity, let's say that India has, to look at this as a more comprehensive, jigsaw puzzle, and to see what combinations of these different types of AI, electricity, compute, data, what would be more strategically important at a grounded local level, to build more regional strategies, if you may, in India.
This is very spot on, and thank you for bringing this up because I believe that while we talk about competing with at world level and asking to create a level playing field, it's also important to look inward and see the disparities that we have within India. Thank you for bringing that up. But let's talk a little global and looking at the AI landscape today, we feel that, in my earlier explainer video, I said that 90% of AI patents and AI investment is limited to a few countries, US, China being the leading ones. So do you think that the world then being risk divided into technological haves and technological have-nots? Or digital neocolonialism is the new buzzword. Do you feel that would be a possible reality?
And certainly, I think if you looked in terms of AI investments, you will see a huge difference, right, in certain countries, especially the US and even Europe to a lesser extent. Um, but I think we can't ignore also public investment, right, which is probably not part of that stat. Um, there is also on the patenting side, just a side comment, I think a lot of the AI innovations that are happening, and it's such a rapid, fast world of AI innovations, they're not so much in patents, but AI conferences, the top AI conferences. They are happening with, younger companies. Of course, the large, monolithic, big companies are moving the needle in terms of AI innovation. And I think there is decent amount of evidence. We had a paper with the Bank for International Settlements on AI and inequality, and we have some similar papers in the US context. There's the same kind of disparity in haves and have-nots in across the US as well, right? I mean, if you looked in the US, most of the investments in San Francisco, in California, New York, a little bit in Texas and Florida, but not the rest of America. In a similar fashion, if you look globally, that's certainly the case. And we also know, I think that at least from some of the macro evidence that we have put out, that generally countries that have higher AI investment, right? You see the bottom income decile in these countries, right? Actually, their incomes generally subsequently get hurt. The middle class is less well known, and the few, the high income deciles, their incomes go up significantly, actually. Um, so yes, AI investment does lead to haves, have-nots, clearly. And I don't think that's necessarily unique to AI investments only, but you would see that with other types of investments as well. Um, but I do think for emerging markets, if one were to consider India as part of that, it's again this unique pathway story, right, to me about building local capabilities in data, how what core unique specializations India can build in relation and context to its core capabilities, its demographic dividend, to create jobs for the younger people. These are open questions, not saying I have the answers, but I think these are questions. How do we design policies and inclusive AI development that it leads to actual tangible benefits for small and medium enterprises? And it's not just an elite AI scenario. There's a concept that we have been floating around, what we call cognitive infrastructure. And the way we think about cognitive infrastructure in this context, it's really about human expertise, domain knowledge, data, people, and networks, right? So whether you are a company or a country, it's thinking about what are the core assets that are most uniquely distinguished in your country and economy. And then what type of AI does it relate to, right? To sort of build your own aspects of integrating these AI systems, deploying them. Because honest fact is, deploying AI systems is not so difficult and complicated, but building good AI systems that move the needle, right? um, which is essentially, put simply, solving an important business or policy use case, right? So I think the world is still struggling, right, to some degrees of tangible business and policy use cases of applying these. So if India can apply this cognitive infrastructure notion that I'm proposing, right, to incorporate sub AI systems in real world challenges based on unique data expertise that India has, um, it could reverse this haves and have not story, right? And by and large, there's one perspective, it's not only perspective, growth is pro poor, that's what people say, which is growth lifts all boats. So if you do build such systems and incorporate and have widespread, growth impacts, productivity impacts, by virtue of just actually having higher economic growth, it does benefit all. And that's exactly what we have seen, I think, over the last 2 decades of India's story, right? It's the growth across the metropolitan areas, but across various parts of India has really lifted a lot of boats than what we had India in the 80s and 90s. So I think it's not the danger that AI will be dominated by a few as much, right? But more practically, um, are we building it in and with designing systems in mind that benefit all? So it all comes back to human beings and who are the humans building these systems for what purposes?
Have some disagreement with the trickle down theory or that growth uplifts all. But to my opinion, later, uh, as you know, as we discussed that, certainly it is concentrated in a few hands, but like we need different approaches to it. Uh, Let me ask one very particular use case, and you tell me if like how India should deal with the problem. Like AI is going to automation or deploying AI technologies would prove helpful in increasing productivity, efficiencies, and it would be particularly helpful for developed countries where human resources may be scarce. But in countries like India, right, where the middle class had just like, I mean, for last 40 years, maybe at the most, have taken up jobs such as coding, software engineering that have provided, middle class better avenues of employment, living standards. Do you think that adopting AI for India in such sectors, while it might increase productivity, is not in favor or for the good of the larger of the society as at large?
You see, when the Industrial Revolution happened, right, It took many decades for it to translate into productivity. Um, and I also, just a side point, I do see where you're coming from, that whether growth lifts all boats or not. Hence, I did caveat by saying that. But the reason Industrial Revolution took so long to actually translate, you see it in productivity numbers, was a lot of processes needed to be developed. So the Industrial Revolution actually, absorbed big amount of labor. You build processes in the factory and worker injuries, laws, and other things. So it took a lot of policy regulations, mobilization of people, urban mobility. It took a couple of decades to translate into productivity. And the biggest paradox in economics, at least, has been that we have not seen actually the direct productivity impacts and growth impacts of AI. Um, because potentially a lot of this, work requires subsequent complementary processes incorporation into business workflows to see and witness these changes down the line. Um, and I don't think that avoiding any new technological leaps by itself, right, is a good thing for any economy or society. Um, because one has to keep up with changing times, because if your competitors or other economies are adopting this, building new and services, making their steel industry, garment industry, and other industries more competitive. It does. It becomes an important aspect for every country to have this as a national imperative, if you know what I mean. But at the same time, I think it does, if what happened with what I call the first service revolution in the Y2K in the 2000 era, right, was there was a labor and cost arbitrage because it was cheaper for Microsoft to spend, I don't know, $1 billion to hire a bunch of people in Bangalore and back office services, call centers. It was cheaper, more competitive and that helped build an engine of growth for the Indian economy, which was replicated in Philippines and various other countries around the world. Um, that was the first service revolution. What I would say, if you look at the progression of how service tasks are done, right? There's production of services, there is distribution and delivery of services, and then there's consumption of services. And there are two types of services. Okay? There are traditional services, which are, require face-to-face contact. So if you are going to a restaurant in your hometown, or you're getting to travel to a certain part of South Asia or India, you have to be there in person to deliver those services, right? So those are traditional services. But what happened with the first service revolution was the advent of modern services where you could be sitting now as a coder. You don't need to be in Bangalore or Mumbai. You can be in Goa and doing your work for a Silicon Valley company, um, and so forth. So the modern services have already become tradable 20 odd years ago, where the distribution, delivery, and consumption of these modern services, right, has already become tradable. So you can sit any corner of the world, and if you have the skills and good connectivity and capabilities with the right networks, you can deliver those services. But what's happening with AI, right? It's not so much, I would say, the tradability, this delivery and consumption of services that is being impacted. That's already happened 2 decades ago. But AI is more so augmenting the production of services. So whether it be, I don't know, the music industry or the film industry, I mean, you saw how through Netflix or DVDs not being existent or CDs not being existent, you can spend something like $10 and get more than 1 million songs on any of the online platforms. So this tradability, delivery, and consumption, right, of services has already become tradable. There's not much AI can do to that. But how do you produce these services, whether traditional or modern, is what AI is really augmenting. And with that, I think what AI could potentially, as a risk, right, lead to here is if AI can do the same back office jobs that were exported or become tradable 2 decades ago, right, and can do it cheaper and faster and better, that definitely creates an imminent risk for emerging markets. So I see your point there as well. If you looked at training of these big GPT-4, 5 models, Gemini from Google, I mean, we don't know exact numbers, but we easily know training them costed over $100 million, right? Um, and subsequently, the disruption happened with DeepSeek and R1, T1, S1 variants of it, where within the span of 2 odd weeks in February of this year, that cost of over $100 million went to 12 million, went down to $450 to, something like $12. Um, so the costs are drastically reducing to a cost of intelligence, if you may put simply, but also the cost of the tokens that you use as like using inputs right into a chatbot and other things. Those costs have gone down over 100% over the last year alone. So this acceleration is proliferating at a rapid pace. Major new developments are happening. Many countries are spending a lot on hyperscaler data centers, acquiring some of the top AI talent, and so forth. So I don't think we know exactly the near term and the long term future of how it would impact middle class and folks at the bottom of the pyramid. But I think we should look at this more from a perspective of an opportunity in countries like Africa, where there's a huge informality. Even in India, there's a lot of still big informal sector economy. So I think we need new innovations and think about this as an opportunity. If it does lead to productivity improvement, how does it augment these traditional services and how does it augment production, right? For people at the bottom of the pyramid, how could the government deliver better public services to them? I think the cases of Aadhaar in India and all these things have been tremendous innovations in India. So I think India is very well capable to be aware of these risks and leverage technology, right, to its advantage to make sure the people at the bottom of the pyramid are actually not hurt by these changes.
And I think what government should also probably do is make people or youth at least ready for these changes. And there should be capacity building at the lowest level amongst in classroom, in colleges. And that is something that I really wish was happening more. But on cue of industrial revolution, my last question that relates to sustainability. What we saw during industrial revolution was that countries that were at the top were the first to industrialize, to pollute, and now they are all going green or had have net zero goals and are asking others to cut emission. While we are still we still haven't reached that living standard, we still do not emit as much, we haven't polluted the earth as much, right? Do you think that this cycle might also be repeated with AI at some point, where like countries like US, China, the EU are developing AI system. They're the first to develop AI systems. Their data centers are harming, are causing emissions, releasing greenhouse gases, and then they are going to turn around and ask India, they are going to turn around and ask India that please do not develop any more AI related technologies, or we would be forced to deal with the climate change. Uh, are like are developing countries being forced to deal with the crisis that they have not asked for in the first place, just like industrial revolution?
I think India has already, I think, taken big stands on, climate change related policies. Uh, I would step back and think about this sort of statement and problem from kind of two perspectives, right? So you see, all of this compute, there's the one aspect of the story is, you know, massive scale data centers and training AI is actually not really green, right? That's one aspect of the story. So this is the story of digital public infrastructure to power AI and other types of new technological revolutions that are happening, right? So that's a digital public infrastructure story. But there is also a broader public infrastructure story, and where AI has not been actually as important a part of the story. If you looked at more broadly public infrastructure, right, it is actually the largest economy or sector, right, industry. It's an industry of industries in the global economy, right? I think about $12 trillion around the world is spent annually. And I think McKinsey and others estimate that more than $2 trillion of this public infrastructure spending actually is kind of inefficiency and wasted. Um, the public infrastructure industry is also very, very important because it impacts anything from how I don't know, take a car from your home to your office, to take the public transit system, what kind of roads you have between different cities, how green are your buildings, are you investing to also diversify your sources of energy from just, power, gas, coal led to solar, wind, LNG, to non-renewable other sources of, oil and gas. It is all of these things and more, defense, agriculture, transportation, different kinds of vertical building, water, sanitation systems, and digital infrastructure among social and public, transport and infrastructure is one subset of it, right? So this whole infrastructure industry, right, is uh, it's very complicated because it's so many different things and different, states, not just in India, but around the world. It transcends jurisdictions of counties, cities, states, central government, multilaterals, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and all these others investing, or financing these various projects. So it's very cumbersome and complicated. And it happens to be the last industry, actually, to adopt new technology, actually. So the world's largest industry is the last to adopt new technologies. So, and it's a very complex challenge, right? Because you see, data for this industry is scattered across many different government websites, on procurement systems, on project websites. There's no single repository of all the activity a government around the world has planned in the next 2 decades to one repository of where all the historic information of outcomes of projects that have happened, what was the impact of that project on the local economy? Did it lead to more inclusive growth and development at a local level or led to divergence? These are all, pen and paper kind of people making judgments. Very early days when I was sort of building my own company, I was speaking to the Indian government, and I was speaking to a top bureaucrat in Delhi, the central government. And this is early days of when AI was not as hot. And I asked him, if AI could solve a problem for you in infrastructure, what would it be? And he told me something very interesting. He said, listen, um, this is a mayor in the state of Agra, right? And he wants to build a public transit system. And he hired some consulting company, and they wrote a concept note and they sent the proposal to the central government. I'm afraid this is going to be approved. Like, how will AI help me make a case that a city like Agra does not need a public transit system because the way the roads are organized, the way the architecture of the city is, this is just going to lead to more congestion, and this is just basically going to be bad. Like, how will AI help me make a case to the central government that this is not the optimal infrastructure to build? And I said, that's very interesting. I don't know if I can do that today at that time, but maybe I could do it today. So, coming back to your question, where there's these two types of infrastructure, right? There's the uh, all the emissions potentially coming from building AI systems, right? And that's a subset of a broader public infrastructure decision-making system. And the broader public infrastructure system is not thinking about using data and AI to plan for projects, plan for which roads and which assets, bridges, and which digital infrastructure is needed where more strategically. So my question is really, why don't we use AI and data to help governments actually build assets to people who need it the most and where, right? That's the role of the government. And yes, I think on the digital infrastructure side, yes, I think it's a price of doing business, but I think there is again designing and building better. I think there are a lot of material science innovations. There are uh, a lot of sort of stakeholders. How do you evaluate who are the suppliers who have built data centers with least wastage, for example, right? How do we become a leader in India and South Asia, right, to build green AI, with renewable power data centers, more with more. Now the trend is of moving away from this large language models to small models. So how do we lead in small model R&D, right? How do we make green AI our India's competitive advantage, which the global market will demand, right? How do we integrate and incorporate environmental resilience as we're building small or large models? So if AI is the next service evolution, not the revolution, I think to your point, let's not repeat the whole industrial pollution playbook that happened over the last decades, but let's make India a green AI exporter. But in context of that, think about leveraging AI and data to help governments build more citizen-centric public infrastructure as well.
And last of the script question, and please answer it only if you feel comfortable. Um, is that what the Taiyo.Ai, that is your infrastructure company, doing, leveraging AI to ensure that more citizen-centric infrastructure is built? Is that what you're doing at Taiyo.Ai?
Very much so, yes. I mean, as I highlighted, where this is the largest industry on the planet, where data and AI have not been applied, and we spoke to a lot of leaders around the world, as I mentioned, the folks in the Indian government, to private sector, public sector players, over 300 around the world, to really understand the nuances and challenges of this industry. And but that's sort of precisely what we have developed and aiming to solve is to help the whole stakeholders in the public infrastructure industry, from governments to the construction companies, suppliers to construction companies, architects, design consultants, just have more awareness about what is the upstream visibility to what are the projects and procurements that are planned and coming out in the future, but also to help them learn from the past, opportunities and mistakes, right? What might be a mistake? I don't know. I was the other day, there were people looking at projects in Meghalaya on our platform, and they were like, how do I build a music auditorium in Meghalaya? Who are the people I should be talking to? What is the tendency of the governor or the state chief minister? Does he like music or not? And they, with our sort of platform, they were able to actually infer that if I'm correct, the chief minister loves playing rock music and he appreciates music very much. So, they had a better sense of walking into the meeting of how to talk to them, who to contact, but also what are ongoing other auditorium music projects in the state of Meghalaya? Um, what are technical engineering research? How do you build more acoustic sound systems to make this more green and sustainable? So a whole arena of use cases, but we're very proud we've released the first sort of AI platform for this massive industry, and very excited to sort of spread our wings and get this in the hands of some of the key sort of decision makers and leaders to help them build more intelligently for the future.
This is amazing work that you're doing, and thank you for joining us on the show today and giving us your valuable insights. And all the best for your future endeavors.
Thank you so much, Hina. I appreciate it. Lovely talking to you.
If you enjoyed watching this episode of Technocracy, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more AI related conversation, you can also watch IGPP Expert Talks AI Special Series.